Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are at the beginning of free agency in the 2050 to 2051 offseason. We just completed our second year as general manager of the Rockies. We improved from a 74-win team in our first season to a 96-win team in our second season. Made the playoffs, lost the NL West by 1 game to the Dodgers. Unfortunately, despite the fact that we were hosting the wild card series, we were bounced 2-0 by another division rival, the San Francisco Giants. So it was a bit of a bittersweet finish to what had been a great comeback season for the Rockies. Definitely feel like we've positioned the team to hopefully be a contender for several years to come with the improvements we made last offseason to our pitching and our defense. And we also, at the end of the season, had an ownership change, and it was for the positive, I believe. Charlie Monfort, at 90 years old, finally sold the team, and Jose Williams bought it from him. And he is going to be the best owner that I've ever worked with while playing OOTP. Lenient, patience, generous fiscal personality, hands-off in terms of his involvement. His priority is extreme winning, but I don't have a problem with that because with the rest of his personality traits, it seems like he's going to hopefully give me a real good opportunity to be successful. And that generous fiscal personality definitely paid off when he boosted our payroll or our budget for next year by $60 million to $260 million. So what that means is we have got a lot of money to potentially improve this team this offseason. We've recently gotten through arbitration, brought back all the players that we wanted, traded away and or released those that we didn't want, and also made a couple trades to kind of help the roster on the margin. So our big project right now is figuring out how to spend the money that we have in free agency. We also did use the boost in funding that we have to increase our scouting budget to $24 million and our development budget to $36 million. $35 million is kind of the point of significantly diminishing returns on player development. So I figure we'll go a little bit above that this year with the extra funds that we have, and hopefully continue to enhance our rapidly improving minor league system. It was 18th when we took it over about 2 years ago. We've got it up to 3rd at this point. Couple of the highlights that we've brought on are Elijah Smith, who we picked number 3 overall in the draft when we had incredible luck in the lottery this past year, moving from 12 to 3, and Yoel Bueno, who we signed as an international amateur free agent a year ago. So what do we need to do in free agency? I'd say there's 2 primary objectives and a couple of secondary objectives for me this year. With the money that we have to spend, we want to add a high-quality starting pitcher. We've got last year's free agent signing, Alvarado, and then the free agent signing we made right when we took over in Vargas, who are heading the staff, along with Galindo, who we traded for last year when we got rid of longtime starter Andres Erizeri. And then we recently re-signed Chase Crawford to an extension. So feel like we've got 4 starters right now, but definitely want to bring on another high-quality starter, ground ball focused if at all possible, with good movement on his pitches to hopefully make him as successful as possible in Coors. And then we'd also like to ultimately add a big bat to the lineup. So those are the 2 primary objectives. The secondary objectives, we had 2 captains on the team last year, personality types. They are both free agents. They are both in their 30s, and they aren't great players. And hoping to bring back a captain personality somehow with all of the moves that we're making. And we also want to improve our team defense. But we want to do those 2 things, hopefully, in the context of a big-time starting pitcher and another big-time bat for our lineup. So we've already made a handful of offers in free agency, 4 minor league contract offers, and then 2 offers that kind of give us some insurance towards the anticipated back end of our 26-man roster next year. One is shortstop Ethan Fox. He's a player you may remember from our Pittsburgh Pirates playthrough. Not a great hitter, not a great player. He's very versatile defensively, can play a lot of positions, but importantly, he's got a captain personality and other good personality traits for the clubhouse. I don't think there's any guarantee that even if he signs with us, he's going to make the roster next year, particularly if we find a higher quality player to be captain. But if we need to kind of keep him as the 25th or 26th man on our roster to ensure we have that captain personality, I think he's perfectly capable as a occasional pinch hitter and an occasional substitute when players are fatigued or injured. So potential back end of the roster spot for Ethan Fox. Similarly, we also made a similar $1.4 million offer to injured shortstop Jordan Casares, recovering from a broken bone in his elbow, still going to be out about 7 weeks. Similar to Ethan Fox, not really much of a hitter, but he has very good speed, and he is a dynamic defensive infielder who can basically play any position in the infield at a pretty high level. So think that he could potentially be a very valuable player for us coming off of the bench also. And the nice thing about Casares is that he does have 1 option year left. Don't know that he's going to be thrilled if he signs with us and we do send him down to AAA. He may refuse that assignment, but we potentially do have that option to him. So I think that in terms of those secondary goals, getting a captain and improving our defense, the optionality of having Fox and or Casares under contract helps ensure that we'll make some progress on those secondary goals. Again, if we bring on a big-time player with a captain personality, it's going to be, I think, pretty difficult for Fox to make the roster, and maybe we trade him at the end of spring training, which would be fine. But it also gives us the optionality as we're making our free agent decisions to not just chase after a captain if that player might not be the best fit for our team. And on that topic of perhaps chasing after a captain personality, that brings us to the 2 starting pitchers we've kind of honed in on. They're both from the Mets, incidentally. Cortez Armendariz, 55 stuff, 65 movement, 50 control. You'll see that is a consistent theme when we look at the other pitcher, at least according to our scout. Extreme ground baller, which we like, combined with the good movement for cores. 4-pitch arsenal. Really only like the fastball and the sinker. The slider is average. The changeup may even be below average, but certainly plenty of weapons to be an effective major league starter. He does have that captain personality that we mentioned, which is really good. Normal injury proneness, looking for around $18 million a year. And he's looking for a 7-year deal into his mid-30s. So he is one option. What I don't love about him is that he is horrible at holding on runners. And if you look at his performance over the course of his career, he's kind of been an average-ish major league pitcher when you look at his ERA plus and his FIP minus. Better with his FIP minuses the last few years, and had one of the best ERA pluses in his career this past season. But $18 million in 7 years is definitely fully valued, but it would enable us to get that captain personality that we're looking for and potentially not have to force a roster spot for Ethan Fox. The other pitcher that we're looking for from the Mets is Javi Toledo, a little lefty, 5'10", 180. Love the fact that he's Iron Man as far as his injury proneness. Also has a good personality, but he does not have the captain personality type. The exact same 55, 65, 50 stuff, movement, and control, at least according to our scout. And although he only has a 3-pitch arsenal, the fastball and cutter are well above average, and even his sinker is above average. So his pitches are better. He's better at holding on runners by a huge margin, also has exceptional stamina, I love the fact that he's an Iron Man as far as his injury proneness. And it would give us a third lefty in the rotation, which doesn't bother me all that much because right now we've only got 2 lefties in the bullpen. So kind of feel like a third lefty in the rotation, given that we're going to be probably most likely, unless we make some other moves, short on lefties in the bullpen. Having a third in the rotation would not bother me very much. So as much as I would love the 2-year younger player in our Mendariz and the captain personality in our Mendariz, the fact that his third and fourth pitches are average to below average, and he really just has one standout pitch in the fastball, the fact that his hold runners is brutal, and the weaker normal injury proneness kind of lead me to think that Javi Toledo may be the way to go. He's not looking for quite as long a contract, 6 years at close to $20 million, so 1 year less, but because he's 2 years older, it's still going to take him to his age 37 season rather than his age 36 season. So I haven't made a decision there for sure, but think that I am probably leaning towards going with Javi Toledo over Cortez Armendariz. One other pitcher to mention as we think about our pitching staff going forward, Mel Armstead is a guy who was picked in the 4th round in 2048 out of FSU before we took the team over. Split last year between AA and AAA, 3.44 ERA in AA before we promoted him to AAA, where he put up a really nice year, 2.67 ERA over 135 innings, 1.69 ERA plus, 79 FIP minus. His average to above average stuff, pretty good movement and good control, a 4-pitch arsenal, which all could be above average if he develops as our scout thinks he could. So he, I think, will play a pretty important role in our pitching staff going forward. The only thing I don't love about him is that his ground ball, fly ball tendency is neutral. Clearly, with the upgrades in our infield defense that we've made over the past year and a half, and a focus on bringing more ground ball pitchers into cores to avoid line drives in that spacious outfield, as well as home runs. Would prefer if he had a ground ball tendency, but still think as a young player who's going to be on a minimum contract for the next 3 years, he could possibly make the team coming out of camp, or if he does end up starting the year in AAA, I would think that Armstead certainly would be the first arm up to the majors if we have injuries at some point or need to shuffle around the pitching rotation. So another option there that I haven't really talked about much in the past, but still think that we want to add a frontline starting pitcher to this team. Moving on to the free agent hitters. This is where there is some real top-end talent available on the free agent market. We'll start with Tony Castellanos, who just won the American League Most Valuable Player. Had an awesome year. You can see 296 average, 39 homers, 122 ribbies, led the league with 127 runs, led the league with a 9.7 WAR. Excellent defensive center fielder, really good speed, and an above-average hitter who over the course of his career has put up a 118 OPS plus and a 117 WRC plus. So a lot to like about him. The only things not to like about him is he's almost 32 years old. He's fragile as far as his injury proneness, and he's looking for close to $38 million a year. And he wants an 8-year contract to his age 39 season. So he's the most expensive option out there. Clearly a very talented player. But you look at 2 of the last 3 years, he's missed basically a third of the season in 2048 and 2049, essentially. So that fragility is not going to get any better as he gets older. And putting $38 million a year into a player that may only be out there for 60, 80, 100 games in a fair number of his seasons with us is definitely a big investment. So I think with the amount of money Castellanos is looking for and the fragility and the length of contract, I have a hard time believing that's the direction we're going to go. But there is another big-time center fielder out there in Jorge Aguilera. He's got the captain personality, so that would be a real attractive feature to bring onto the team. Very good defensively, but not as good as the other center fielder we looked at. Has a little bit of speed, but not as fast. I think you could argue his bat is a little bit better and over the course of his major league career. He's certainly demonstrated that with a 151 OPS plus and a 151 WRC plus. The concern with him is the same, though. Although he's a little younger, he's fragile. And you can see he honestly has only played one what you would call full season in his career with 141 games. That was back when he was a 24-year-old 5 years ago. Since then, the most games he's played in a season is 112, and he's had a year where he played a quarter of the games in 2047 and barely half of the games in 2049. And he is also coming off of a pretty significant injury last year where he missed 7 weeks with recurring back spasms. And you can see he's had back spasms all over the course of his career. And they moved up to a recurring level this past year that kept him out for 7 weeks. So I like the glove, love the bat, love the personality, love that he's younger and cheaper than the other center fielder. But he's still looking for an 8-year deal, which would take him up to his age 37 season. He's still in the mix, unlike Castellanos, because of the captain personality, because of about $6 million a year less, because he's younger. But the fragility of both of those players really concerns me. Which leads us to a potentially somewhat less expensive free agent option in Jose Mendoza. Normal in terms of his injury proneness, 30 years old, really well-balanced bat, kind of above average to excellent in everything. Good personality overall with the high work ethic and intelligence, but he does have some traits that aren't perfect in terms of the low leadership and loyalty, and he's a bit greedy. He's not as good defensively as either of those center fielders. He's a corner outfielder, not a shock there. But he's still been pretty productive over the course of his career with a 134 OPS plus, 133 WRC plus. And he's looking for about $12 million a year less than Castellanos, and still about $5 million a year less than the other center fielder. But also looking for a long contract, 9 years, almost $26 million a year. Even with him being normal injury proneness, don't know that I want to make that type of long-term commitment to him. But I would think that Aguilera or Mendoza have a chance at me making an offer to them. Castellanos is the oldest and also the one looking for the most money. I don't think that's going to work, even though I would love to have his glove out in the outfield. And a final option that we've been considering is just tapping the trade market to find a bat. And Elijah Moore from the Mariners seems like the most realistic option. And he does have the captain personality that we're looking for. Pretty good bat. His contact and his home run power is as good as anybody that we've looked at. Also has really good gap power, but kind of wasted because he's slow. He's the worst defensive player of the mix that we're talking about as far as outfielders. He can also play first base, though, which is helpful. He's durable. And over his 5 years in the majors, he's been extremely productive. 128 OPS plus, 127 WRC plus, never hit fewer than 32 home runs, never drove in fewer than 87 runs, though. So a very potent He's in his arbitration years now, so he's making 12.2 this year and expected to make close to 14 next year. So he's less expensive in terms of the contract than the other guys that we're looking at. And his bat is strong, like all of those players' bats. His glove is not as good, but he does have the durability and the captain personality. The issue is that we're only giving up money and a future draft pick for those free agent bats, whereas in the case of Elijah Moore, we're giving up some money, not quite as much as we're going to have to pay those free agents, but we also need to give up assets to bring him on board. And the issue is we have to give up a not immaterial amount of assets to get Elijah Moore with the best trade I've been able to work out. We'd have to give up right fielder Nick Moore, who's the number 85 prospect in baseball, 23-year-old. He's normal as far as his injury proneness right now, but he is coming off of a ruptured MCL, which basically ruined his season last year. He hit 280 in 107 at-bats in Double-A for us. He's got a good personality, former first-round draft pick of ours, and he profiles as a pretty good offensive player. I don't think he is as good as Elijah Moore, but he is 3 years younger and 3 years potentially making the minimum salary in the majors, as opposed to the $12 million plus that we'd be paying for Moore this year, and even more that we'd be paying to Moore next year. But I don't think that's bad. But I also would need to include Israel Cota, who was our first-round draft pick with this team, 11th overall, about a year and a half ago. Brought on Cota thinking that he was going to be a very dynamic defensive player, potentially a shortstop for us, with the thought that he was going to have at least an average-ish to slightly above average major league bat. The issue is that Cota's bat really is not developing. He hit 273 with 5 homers in Double-A last year, and we moved him up to Triple-A in September, and he hit 234 there in 64 at-bats. And my concern with Cota is that the scouting report has just been moving in the wrong direction on him over the last year plus. We thought he had 60 contact potential, now it's 50. We thought he had 50 power potential, now it's 45. We thought he had 55 eye, now it's 45. And our scout is pretty good. And even as we think his potential has been coming down, perhaps more alarmingly, he actually hasn't improved since we brought him into our minor league system. His contact is still a 40, his power is still a 30, and his eye is still a 35. So while I think it's aggressive to move on from a number 11 overall pick, literally about 16 or 17 months later, I think there are signs that although Cota is going to have a nice glove, he's never going to have the bat to be a starter in the major leagues. So he's really profiling more and more as a utility player right now. I mean, if his contact, home run power, and eye, which are the 3 ratings I care about most, all develop fully, he's an average contact hitter with below average home run power and a below average eye. You know, a little bit of gap power is fine. The potential to avoid strikeouts is fine. But the fact that he's been in our minor league system for 2 seasons now, and he hasn't improved in any of those 3 key traits according to our scout, is getting a little scary to me, because he's also going to turn 24 years old next year. He was a player that we drafted out of Duke. And I do just wonder whether he is going to develop the way that we need. So that's why I'm potentially willing to use him in this deal. The pros for Elijah Moore: he's a really good hitter. He can play first base or the outfield, and he gives us that captain personality. The things I don't love about Elijah Moore: he's not that good defensively in the outfield, and he's not that great defensively at first base either. I mean, he's 6'4", he's got acceptable range, he'd be fine there. But he is not as dynamic a defensive player as some of those free agents that we have available. And we have to give up a pretty good outfield prospect and a guy that we spent a first-round pick on last year that may have been a misspent first-round pick. But still, worst-case scenario is Cota has a lot of value as a excellent defensive player with a below-average bat. So there's definitely value in Israel Cota if he's able to develop a little bit over the next year or two. But by the same token, or maybe by a opposite token, if I'm using my speech the wrong way, when I look at Jordan Casares, the guy that we just made an offer to as a free agent, he's even better defensively, got more speed and is a better bunter, and has a pretty similar batting profile to what we thought we were potentially getting from Israel Cota. So although we're only going to potentially get him signed for 1 year, maybe we can sign him to an extension and he can fill that role going forward that we thought Israel Cota was going to fill for us. So that's kind of a high-level summary of what the most interesting options on the free agent and trade market are from my perspective. But now I got to figure out what I'm going to do in terms of making offers to some of these people, because the rubber starts to meet the road right now. So the nice thing is that if we are only going to go after 1 or 2 big-time free agents with the amount of money we potentially have available, we can probably try to front-load the contracts a bit. And if we front-load them enough, they'll obviously be easier for us to digest going forward. But even more importantly than that, I think we may be able to get them to shave a few years off of what they're looking for. As we talked about with the pitchers, it's Cortez Armendariz, the captain personality, but really bad at holding on runners, and he hasn't performed quite as effectively at the major league level as has Javi Toledo with his 114 ERA plus and his 85 FIP minus, his Ironman injury proneness, and his exceptional ability to hold on runners. He is 2 years older, though. But I think we're going to make an offer to Javi Toledo first. Would love to get the captain personality from Armendariz. But I like the 3-pitch arsenal that Toledo has better than the 4-pitch arsenal that Armendariz has. I like that Toledo's better at holding runners, much better. I mean, you've gone from like the best in the game in Toledo to like the worst in the game in Armendariz. And I like the fact that Toledo is an Iron Man. We don't need him to be our ace, and he certainly has a pitching profile and 2-time All-Star and a 1-time World Series champion where he's used to being the ace of the staff, and certainly when you look at the numbers he's put up over the course of his career, he has been an ace on many occasions. We've got a pretty good pitching staff filled with guys with good movement, ground ball tendencies, good personalities. I feel like we've got a staff filled with, right now, probably 3 guys who are 2 or 3 starters on a good team. And I feel like Toledo kind of fits that same role. He's a really good 2 or a great number 3 starter. And basically, I think we've got a pitching staff with Alvarado, Vargas, and Galindo of 3 guys who are number 2 or number 3 starters on a good team. Toledo gives us another one. It's probably not perfect that we don't have a lights-out ace on the staff, but I think if you build a team and you end up with a guy like Chase Crawford as your number 5 pitcher and your 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all guys who could be number 2 starters on a good team, you're still in pretty good shape. So I don't think the rotation is perfect, but willing to make a play for Javi Toledo to hopefully make it better. The issue is going to be how long I want to do that. Now, I do feel a little better about taking a pitcher like him, who's an Iron Man in terms of his injury proneness right now, into his age 37 season. But still, in a perfect world, would like to do less than this 6-year contract with a player opt-out. So we'll see if I can structure something with similar money to what he's looking for, maybe a little more optionality for us as far as the options, and maybe a little bit front-loaded in terms of the money. So Toledo was looking for 6 years at an average of $19.7 million with a player option to opt out after the 4th season. We're going to offer him 5 years at an average of $19.2 million. So we're close on the money, only $466,000 a year apart, which when you're dealing with those kind of numbers isn't huge. But it's only a 5-year deal, and there's a team option heading into the 5th season. So more optionality for us, a little bit front-loaded with more money this year and then less going forward. We'll see what he thinks about it. And Javi Toledo's willing to think about the offer. So we have a big offer out to one player, in addition to the smaller offers that we've got out to Ethan Fox and Jordan Casares. And you can see we've still got over $30 million to spend on free agents, which, with the outfielders that we're thinking about, either Aguilera or Mendoza, we can potentially bring one of them on board also pretty easily if we structure the contract the right way. As much as I like Jorge Aguilera's glove and his bat and his captain personality, the fragility and the fact that we're going to need to be paying him about $32 million a year for 8 years until he's 37 years old just scares me off. I think he's a great player, and he's probably going to have 3 great years in the 8 years of his contract if he gets the 8 years that he's looking for. But I think he's going to have 3 great years, 2 or 3 half seasons, and 2 or 3 years where you probably get little or nothing out of him. And I'm looking for a little more consistency and stability in a guy that I'm going to be paying over $30 million a year for. So we've got to move on from him. So that's going to essentially leave us with the option to bring on Jose Mendoza for about $25 million a year. Don't have to give up any players. We will have to likely give up probably a 2nd or 3rd round draft pick, maybe even a 1st. But we don't have to give up any players. Good personality, but pretty volatile. He's a green or red in every aspect that he can be. Like his bat a lot. Like that he is a decent defensive player. Compared to Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore's outfield range is lower. His error rating is actually better, but his arm is a lot worse. Overall, I think Elijah Moore is a weaker defensive player, but Elijah Moore can play first base, and that's attractive potentially only because we do right now have Jamel Cohen as our first baseman, and he's coming off of a bit of a down year, I guess, but still a very solid, productive year. But we've got an $18 million team option on him for next season, so we could potentially be moving on from him, depending on what kind of year he has, depending on what our team looks like a year from now. and potentially having Elijah Moore in our system could give us a plug-and-play first baseman to replace Cohen with, who's got a pretty big bat. So while I don't love giving up assets for Elijah Moore, and I would love to spend all of this money that we have to spend, I think there's definitely an argument that we're getting an upgrade in the outfielder that we're trading away, even though he's one of the top 100 prospects in baseball. And in Israel Coda, we're kind of admitting that we may have reached with the pick of him last year and kind of admitting that he's not developing the way that we want. And as I talked about, we're basically replacing, at least for this coming year, but we thought we might be getting from Coda if we're able to get Casares on board. And getting that captain personality and Elijah Moore on board gives us a lot more flexibility to potentially not feel forced to give a roster spot to Ethan Fox coming out of spring training to ensure that we've got a captain on the team. So I think there's a lot of reasons for us to, if I can click properly here, for us to think seriously about Elijah Moore. But I love the fact that we don't have to give up either of those prospects to bring Mendoza on board. I think he is a little better package in the outfield. Either of those guys would be a left fielder for us, and we would hope that they could spend some time at DH, quite honest. I really like that Mendoza's above average in everything with his bat, and although he's going to cost us more money, we've got the money to spend. I do think, though, with the exceptional contact and the excellent home run power, that Elijah Moore's bat is a little better. He's durable, so I think we can count on him most years to have seasons similar to what he's experienced in the early stages of his career in Seattle, where he's out there 150 games a season. He's younger at 26 years old, and he also brings us that captain personality. As much as I'd love to ensure that we're spending every bit of the money that we've got available for free agents, I like that we don't have to force it as far as the captain personality. We got Elijah Moore on board, and he's a guy that we're going to be very happy to play every day of the season, either in left field, first base, or DH. So even though we have to give up trade assets to bring him on board, and even though we're not using up as much of the money we've got to spend, I think that the 26-year-old Elijah Moore, who's would still be under our control for another season after this, makes more sense than perhaps offering 6, 7, 8 years to Mendoza. He wants 9. I think he'll be a very effective hitter over that time frame. But I think I'd rather go with the guy who's 4 years younger, in Elijah Moore. So we are going to see if we can work this trade back out and bring a big bat on board through the trade market. And I think we've got a deal together to bring Elijah Moore on board. The bat is going to play really well in cores. Love the durability, given that a lot of our outfielders are fragile or wrecked physically. Love the captain personality. Only things I don't love are his mediocre defensive abilities at both outfield and, to a lesser extent, first base. In a perfect world, I'd love to play him in left field, but Coors is a pretty expansive outfield, and that below average range is not going to play great out there. So I don't love that. I think he's really most likely a first baseman or DH for us. But there's a lot of positives. We're also going to get a little cash back and a minor league reliever with a decent personality who's never going to amount to anything. And we have to move on from Coda. But as I've talked about, as much as I like the glove, as much as I like the personality with the high work ethic particularly, the bat literally has not developed one bit since he joined our system. And our view on his upside continues to go in the wrong direction. So I think best case scenario is he's a utility infielder at this point, and a very useful one if his bat completely develops with that glove. But at almost 24 years old, it's conceivable that his bat is not going to develop much more. And if it, let's say, only develops to 45 contact, 35 home run power, 40 discipline, as good as his glove is, he's getting to be a questionable guy whether you'd want on your roster just because the bat is potentially so bad. So it was a mistake, or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe a more accurate way to express it is that it just didn't work out. So maybe it'll work out better for Coda in the Mariners system. And then Nick Moore, number 85 prospect in baseball, a guy that the Mariners organization picked in the first round 5 years ago. A good bat, a good personality, but his bat is not as good as Elijah Moore's, and Moore is only 3 years older. And Nick Moore, with that 40 outfield range, particularly in Coors, is... I question whether you can even play him in left field out in Coors. I mean, we would need to probably at times in a pinch. He also doesn't have the ratings where he could really play first base at all. So he's a DH most likely. And a DH in Coors whose home run power is maybe only slightly above average doesn't excite me that much. And we've also got the issue with what he's going to look like physically when he recovers from that ruptured MCL. So although he's a top 100 prospect, I think that bringing on Elijah Moore blocks him for some time period from playing time. And then you also have to keep in mind, as I think about our team, that we've got another young outfielder in Bobby Perez who just came up end of last season, who's going to be our right fielder likely for the next several years. And none of those guys can play center field. So you could argue that Moore is pretty blocked for the next few years, and that's not even taken into account that we have Andrew Booker, who's been a starting left fielder / first baseman for us, very effective offensively the last few years. Don't love his personality and don't love that he's fragile, but he's still making the major league minimum, so he's going to be around a few more years. We've got Manlio Milinhos, our Rule 5 pick from a year ago. All he did was hit 343 and 213 at-bats for us. Don't necessarily want to move on from him. And for some reason, they keep switching Yoshitaro Nakahara to a starting pitcher, which he is not. I was looking for him. I don't know if I'm going to have to go do something in my settings. I pretty much control everything. But we've got him signed for another couple years. He's wrecked physically, but still has a plus bat, particularly in Coors against right-handed pitchers. So I just don't know that we need Nick Moore. And as I talked about with Israel Coda, I think we're basically getting the best case scenario of what Israel Coda is if we're able to sign Casares as a free agent. So although I don't love giving up either of those guys, Elijah Moore is a better player than either of them right now, and he is almost certainly a better player than either of them will ever become. Gives us a captain personality, gives us another big bat for the team to build around in the coming years. So, Elijah Moore, welcome to Colorado. And the fans are ecstatic. We brought him on board. The players appreciate his leadership. Big boost in fan interest. We were in the low 90s, I believe. Now we're over 100 after bringing on Moore. So all the more reason to feel good about that deal. Put Moore right into the lineup. As I mentioned, he could end up playing first over Cohen. He could end up being DH. He could end up spending some time in left field. Gives us a lot of options and gives us another big professional bat for this upcoming season. So we still have a lot of money to spend if we want to. But right now, I think the focus is going to be ensuring that we get Javi Toledo on board at a number that works for us. And certainly with the fact that we probably are not going to be going after one of the big outfielder free agents, if Toledo comes back for us looking for more money, probably makes sense to try to front load any extra money that we do decide is worth giving him, to spend it now and then hopefully have him at a bit lower number going forward. But we'll see how that goes. We've got to wait to hear from Toledo, Fox, and Casares. Clearly, if Fox rejects us, we probably would move on from him, given that we now have a full-time captain personality on board. But if Fox signs with us, I think we can potentially find final roster spot for him or trade him away heading out of spring training if he's not going to make the team. And those of you who have been watching this series for a long period of time know that I've been waiting to see if Bobby Witt Jr., who was a key player of our Kansas City Royals team in the first 2023 out of the park playthrough I did, or 23 out of the park playthrough that I did before moving to Pittsburgh and then ultimately to Colorado. He's been on the ballot for many years, has not made it in. I never really vote for the Hall of Fame, but I'm actually going to vote for him this year just to see, when we look at Bobby Witt Jr., you look at the numbers and he's been in the 50s and 60s percent-wise most of the past decade. I think my vote only counts the same as anybody else's. But if I have a super vote or something, since I very ever rarely vote on the Hall of Fame and don't pay a ton of attention to it, if I have a super vote that can potentially push him over in terms of winning, I'm going to gonna vote for him. Certainly has a nice resume. Rookie of the Year, 9 Gold Gloves, 5 World Series, 4 playoff MVP awards, 10-time All-Star, 80.6 WAR. We'll see if we can finally get Bobby Witt Jr. in the Hall of Fame this year, going up against Carlos Correa and Danny DeAndre, though he's got some big players on the ballot. The first-timer DeAndre would think he will certainly be a very strong candidate for enshrinement in Cooperstown. Wander Franco, surprised that he hasn't made it yet either, but we'll submit a ballot for Bobby Witt Jr. and see if that changes things. And we have heard back from Javi Toledo. He likes our offer. So we'll see if anyone's going to be able to match it. Supposedly Detroit is also interested in him, and we did give him less years than he was looking for, a little less money than he was looking for. So not going to shock me if we end up having to work a little harder to get him on board. And normally I don't pay a ton of attention to all of the trade proposals I get. I mean, I look at them, but generally they're garbage. But this one from the Cardinals actually interests me. We were talking about our left fielder, Andrew Booker, not that long ago, and how I hate his personality and the potential influence on the locker room. I don't love that he's fragile. What I do like about him is his production on the field. 3 years, he's put up a 133 OPS plus and a 134 WRC plus. I should say parts of 3 seasons, 2 full years. He's got some speed. Hits a lot of doubles. And he's respectable defensively. And he can also play first base for us. But that's a little bit less of an issue after our recent trade. And the Cardinals are offering us Raul Perez, who's durable as opposed to fragile. The same age, they're both 26, although Perez has not been up at the majors as long. And he has not been nearly as productive an offensive player as Booker has. But he's also been playing in St. Louis rather than playing in Colorado. He's got a lot of gap power, and he's got excellent speed. And I think he's a little bit better defensively. 65 range, 50 error, 55 arm. So he's better range, better arm, not as good of an error rating. But I would view that as being better. I think outfield range is the most important. I love a guy with a good error rating like Booker, but if you don't get to the ball, you can't make a play on it. So although his error rating is only average, I think that range, particularly in left field and cores, would play nicely. So I don't think this is a horrible offer. Clearly Booker is a better hitter, at least in terms of their ratings right now. He's 10 points higher in contact, 5 points higher in home run power. But Perez has a better eye, and he's better at avoiding strikeouts. The eye I care about a bit more than the avoiding strikeouts. And Perez has got more speed. Not as good a bunter. And honestly, Perez is more just a solid player against lefties or righties, whereas Booker's profile is definitely special against right-handed hitters. There's no doubt about that. Defensively, as we talked about, I take the guy with the better range and the better arm over the guy with a little better error, or much better error rating, let's be fair, 65 to 50. But you can see that overall, in terms of his ability to play the outfield position, Perez is viewed as better. And Perez brings that durability where I know he's going to be out there every day, as opposed to Booker, who's fragile. And we have gotten 2 complete seasons out of him in a row, but you never know when that's going to change. I'm intrigued by the offer in as much as I would like to get Booker's disloyal and unmotivated personality out of our locker room. I don't think it's quite enough. If they'd be willing to give us something more, I would think about it. I just don't know how much more they're going to be willing to give to us. The fact that Booker's bat is so special against right-handed pitching makes it hard for me to do this trade, even though it's something I've obviously thought about. All right, this is kind of out of nowhere, but I've turned the offer from Raul Perez from St. Louis into an absolute potential blockbuster. We would be bringing on center fielder Robbie Carrillo, who is durable, pretty darn good defensively. He can actually even play in the infield. Don't love him at second base, but he could certainly play at first. But he can play more than competent center field. He's not as good defensively as Padilla is in center field, but Padilla is fragile. So I would think that Carrillo would be a left fielder for us, which would certainly improve our defense in spacious cores. And then he could fill in at center field whenever Padilla needed a day off or was injured. I don't love that he's low intelligence, but he's a fully developed major leaguer at this point. And his bat is not exceptional, but it's, according to our scout at least, above average in everything. And over the course of his career, he's been a little bit above average in terms of what he's done offensively. And I think that, he led the league in triples this past year, had 28 home runs. I think that those numbers playing in cores could both be higher. Only concern with him is that he is signed to an extension already with the Cardinals, and he's going to be making close to $35 million a year through his age 30 season, and then he can opt out. So a lot of the money that we thought we might have to spend on free agents in future years is going to go to bringing on Carrillo, but we're getting him in his late 20s, plus bat, really good glove, going to be out there every day with that durability. And we do have a deal together that St. Louis would keep 25% of his contract, which is better than nothing. Now we have to give up Booker, who they were still looking for originally. That I don't mind at all. We're upgrading from fragile to durable. We're getting a somewhat better personality in a clubhouse. I don't like dumb players, but I will take a dumb guy over one who's greedy, a poor leader, disloyal, and doesn't work hard. We're getting a nice upgrade in terms of our defensive ratings. And we're getting a different bat, but I think perhaps a better overall bat. And I know that sounds surprising when Booker's put up a 133 OPS plus and 134 WRC plus, but if we look at his home and road batting splits from this past year, his OPS plus was average and his WRC plus was only a little bit average. So let's not go putting Booker in the Hall of Fame right now. Carrillo, on the other hand, last year was pretty effective at home and even better on the road. The best year of his career so far. So I think it makes sense from that perspective to get them to take the last 5% of his contract. We had to throw in Nando Verkoven. Absolutely fine doing that. But we do have to give up the young starting pitcher that we talked about earlier, Mel Armstead, who is going to be kind of our insurance policy, kind of our number one guy to go to if we had some injuries. But as we talked about, although I do like his movement, I don't love that he doesn't tend towards ground balls with his pitching. Also don't love the personality. He is a potential two-way player, as you can see, but his batting is not exceptional enough that I've ever felt the need to try to develop him on that front. So it definitely hurts to give up Armstead, and it hurts to give up Booker. But I think we're getting a big upgrade, and we're getting a big-time player. Upgrading our offense, we're upgrading our defense, and we're getting a big-time outfielder who we're going to have for at least the next 4 seasons. With the Cardinals paying a chunk of his contract, he's still going to be making $23-ish million a year that we're going to have to pay him in the 3rd and 4th years of this deal. So he's not going to be cheap to bring on board. But I think bringing Carrillo on board along with the recent addition of Elijah Moore, probably just means that we're going to move on from Jamel Cohen at the end of this season and the $18 million that we potentially owe him. So this kind of happened out of nowhere, wasn't expecting it, but I love guys who I know are going to be available more often than not, and the durable Carrillo fits that bill over Andrew Booker. I think they're going to be close to similar in terms of their offensive production. Carrillo's better defensively, and he has a less objectionable personality than Mr. Booker does. I don't love giving up the pitcher Armstead. If he was ground ball focused, I probably wouldn't do it, but I think we've improved our pitching staff enough, and we've got the ability to improve it even more with the free agents that we're looking at bringing on, that we're going to pull the trigger on this trade out of nowhere. Ooh, and that's interesting. That's good. Clubhouse secretly appreciates that we got rid of Booker because that personality was a negative influence, so that's positive. Fans are excited to have Robbie Carrillo on board. Certainly our fan interest well above 100 now. I think based on that, those recent acquisitions, we're going to up ticket prices another $1 as we get closer to the winter meetings. And you can see the amount of money we have for free agents is going down. That's fine. But I think the additions of Carrillo and Elijah Moore have really improved our offense. Now it's just a matter of ensuring that we can get Javi Toledo on board. And this offseason is coming together. Maybe not exactly as we intended, because I certainly did not see us picking up Carrillo, but going to have to give up a third-round pick as compensation for bringing on Javi Toledo. But the fans are excited, and we have our pitcher on board, another left-handed pitcher. So a little bit front-loaded in that contract, which, as we've talked about, is fine, but fan interest right now is off the charts. We've got a lot of money to spend still, but with the additions of Toledo to our rotation, Carrillo to our outfield, and Moore to either our infield or outfield, the fact that we've added 3 big-time impact players since free agency started, our scouting and development budgets are as big as they've ever been, and we've still got money to take on contracts. I'm pretty excited about the early stages of the way this offseason has gone. And we'll obviously be adjusting things as we get closer to the regular season. But you can see if we look at the 6-man rotation we'd like to run in spring training, we've got Alvarado, Galindo, Vargas, and Javi Toledo as our top 4. Chase Crawford or Victor Fields would be our 5th and 6th. I think we'll tend to go with Crawford because otherwise we only have one left-handed arm out of the bullpen in Latrell Young. So that's probably going to ultimately result in Victor Fields being in the bullpen when all is said and done. Got our new closer, Omar Jones, and then Colbert, Gutierrez, Rodez, Mingo, and Lucio and Young all coming back. So we've added a big-time starter in Javi Toledo, and we have added a big-time closer in Omar Jones this offseason. Taking a look at the lineups, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches at this point. Tony Padilla, and we are going to change this, but with Carrillo on board, Tony Padilla, who got MVP votes last year, was an all-star and hit .316 with 33 homers and 87 ribbies. According to our manager, isn't even in the starting lineup. Manlio Meljinhos, who we talked about, hit .343 last year as a rookie, isn't in the starting lineup against lefties or righties. And Juan Castillo, who's coming off a year when he won a Gold Glove at second base, isn't in the starting lineup against lefties or righties at this point. We will be adjusting this. I do think that ultimately we're probably going to want Padilla in center, Perez in right, Carrillo in left, and then potentially Nakahara is a DH at some point. Also got to ensure that we get both Cohen and Moore into the lineup. So we do have some things to tweak, but feel like the additions of Elijah Moore coming off a 40 homer season and Robbie Carrillo coming off a 28 home run season, playing in parks that are not going to be nearly as effective for them to hit in as cores will be our big upgrades. The only thing that maybe have to think about, and we're not going to change it now, is that moving on from Andrew Booker did take a left-handed bat out of our lineup. Right now I would think that Jamal Cohen and Bobby Perez are the only left-handed bats that are going to be in every day. But with Nakahara and Milinhos, we do have useful bats that we can potentially use off the bench or against right-handers as we kind of build this lineup. But I think it's been a really interesting offseason for the Rockies so far. Clearly, between the trades that we have made and the free agent signings, most of our work is done. Would love to hear back soon from Fox and Casares to see what they're thinking. Hopefully we'll know soon whether they're going to come back. Would not mind if Casares signs with us. If Fox decides there are greener pastures for him, honestly, I don't mind, given that with the addition of Mr. Moore, we do have a captain personality on the team. So it's been a crazy episode, certainly an unexpected twist for us to end up with a center fielder like Carrillo based on that random offer that the Cardinals had sent to us. But I think we have definitely made the team better, and we still have money to spend this year, and we still have some money potentially for extensions. We definitely are getting ourselves into a more obligated situation here. You can see particularly with Carrillo. But even if he opts into that contract, we've got the Cardinals paying a big chunk of it. So we're going to be, a little over $25 million for him in his age 29 and 30 seasons. And then we'd be about $23 million if he opts in after that. So it's not a crippling contract for us with the amount that we got the Cardinals to take on. But admittedly, the fact that we now have Alvarado, Javi Toledo, and Robbie Carrillo signed for big numbers through several seasons out does potentially limit our flexibility going forward. That said, with an owner who has shown a willingness to spend and an owner who really only cares about winning, if we win some games and maybe a title and are a consistent playoff team, there's certainly an opportunity, I would think, for that budget to even go higher if he's happy with what we're doing. So I think we're in a real interesting position with this team, and looking forward to see how the winter meetings go in terms of maybe getting the players that we have made offers to signed. Going to still see if we can find some talent in the Rule 5 draft, and then we're going to obviously head into the preseason and spring training after we find out the Hall of Fame vote. So there's going to be a lot going on in our next episode. And until then, thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.